The last thing she said to me was, "Just wait a little longer." She said it the way people promise rain in a drought, softly, vaguely, without urgency. I waited. Through changing seasons, through postponed plans, through conversations that ended with her phone face down between us like a third presence I wasn't allowed to question. And then one morning, I woke up and she was someone else's wife. No explanation. No apology. Just a photo on social media. Her in white, smiling beside a man whose name I had heard too often, framed as reliable, safe, practical. Stability, she called it. As if love were a luxury item she could return when times got hard. I didn't confront her. Didn't beg. Didn't ask, why not me? I disappeared. I changed my number, quit the job we'd planned our future around, left the city that still smelled like her shampoo on rainy days. I took everything I was and folded it into silence. That was when she panicked. Missed calls from unknown numbers. Emails that grew longer, messier, desperate. Where did you go? Why won't you answer? Please, just say something. But silence, once chosen, becomes a boundary. And I had finally learned how to keep one. I met her on a Tuesday that tasted like rain and reckless dreams. Neither of us had anything back then. Just ambition stitched together with borrowed hope and the kind of hunger that makes you believe the world owes you something if you just reach hard enough. We were two people standing at the edge of everything we wanted, holding on to each other like lifelines. She used to joke that love was our emergency fund. Something warm. Something reliable. Something we could cash in when the world became too sharp, too unstable, too cruel. I believed her. Back then, she held my hand differently. Her fingers laced through mine with a kind of desperation that felt like devotion. Like I was her gravity. Like without me, she might float away into some cold, indifferent stratosphere where dreams went to die alone. I mattered. Or at least, I thought I did. I paid my dues in patience. In quiet encouragement, whispered over cheap coffee and midnight phone calls. In showing up to her family dinners where her parents looked at me like I was a placeholder, a temporary inconvenience before she found someone with a pedigree and a portfolio. She always defended me afterward, always said the right things in private, but she never defended me there, never in front of them. After I'm settled, she would say, her voice soft and soothing like a lullaby meant to keep me docile. After the promotion. After the loans are paid. After life becomes safer. After. I built a home in that word. Furnished it with faith. Convinced myself that waiting was the ultimate proof of devotion, that endurance equaled loyalty. That love was just quiet, patient work, the kind that didn't demand recognition or reciprocation right away. I was wrong. Love, I learned, should not feel like standing in an endless line while someone else shops for better options. It should not taste like swallowing your own worth just to avoid being labeled difficult. It should not require you to shrink so someone else has room to grow. But I didn't know that yet. The signs started small, almost forgettable. Fewer dates. More canceled plans. Conversations that felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced her responses in the mirror before delivering them to me with just enough warmth to keep me tethered. Her eyes began drifting whenever her phone buzzed. A flicker of something, excitement, guilt, would cross her face before she remembered I was watching. Work, she'd say, always work. I told myself I was being insecure, paranoid. That my anxiety was a character flaw I needed to manage, not an instinct trying to save me. She told me I was overthinking. What she didn't tell me was that while I was waiting, she was choosing. And choices, once made in the quiet chambers of someone's heart, don't need explanations. They don't require your consent. They only need consequences. I remember the last time she held my hand the old way. We were walking through the park near her apartment, the one where we used to sit on the grass and plan futures we'd never build. The autumn air smelled like dying leaves and something ending. Her phone buzzed. She pulled away to answer it. When she returned, Her hand felt different in mine. Lighter. More performative. Like she was going through the motions of affection out of habit rather than need. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said, smiling that smile I was starting to recognize, the one that meant she was already somewhere else. I should have asked more, should have demanded honesty, should have confronted the growing distance between us with the urgency it deserved. But I was still operating under the old rules. The ones where love meant giving people space. Where trust meant not interrogating every silence. So I said nothing. And in that nothing, everything began to dissolve. That night, lying in bed alone, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly I'd stopped being her emergency fund and started becoming her debt, something she was desperate to pay off and forget. The answer, I would soon learn, was that I'd never been her safety net at all. I'd been her placeholder. And someone else had just made a better offer. She spoke about him the way people describe furniture they're considering buying. Clinical. Practical. Detached. "He's stable," she said one evening over dinner I'd cooked, in the apartment where I'd waited for her to come home. Her voice carried no passion, no electricity, just the flat certainty of someone checking items off a list. "He has connections." I felt something inside me begin to crack, hairline fractures spreading across the foundation I'd built my entire understanding of us upon. "He understands reality." Each word landed like a quiet insult. Not loud enough to be called cruelty. Not soft enough to be mistaken for kindness. Just truth, delivered like a termination notice. I was never introduced as love. Not anymore. When her colleagues asked about me at company events she finally started inviting me to, I became my boyfriend. Said with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for my dentist or my accountant. Necessary. Functional. Replaceable. I was introduced as history, as effort, as something sentimental but impractical, like keeping your childhood teddy bear in a box you never open. He had a house, not an apartment with second-hand furniture and dreams of someday. A house. With a mortgage that spoke of permanence and a garage that could fit the kind of car I couldn't afford to insure. He had a title. Vice president of something impressive at a company whose name dropped like an anchor in conversations, pulling all attention downward into admiration. He had a future already mapped out. Clean. Predictable. Safe. I had faith and unfinished plans. Hope and hunger. Love and nothing else substantial enough to weigh on a scale her parents would approve of. The night she told me she was engaged, the world didn't end dramatically. There were no thrown objects. No screaming. No theatrical collapse of the universe. Just her voice, shaking, not with guilt, but with relief. She stood in my kitchen, the one where we'd laughed and cooked and pretended we were building something permanent, and she told me she'd said yes to someone else. "I hope you understand," she whispered. Understanding is what broke me. Because I did understand. Perfectly. With the kind of horrible clarity that strips away all the protective delusions you've wrapped around yourself. She didn't leave me for love. She left me to avoid fear. And fear, when it dresses itself up as responsibility and practical wisdom and mature decision-making, is the hardest adversary to argue with. How do you fight someone's terror of uncertainty when you yourself are the embodiment of risk? "He makes sense," she continued, and I heard what she didn't say. "You don't." I congratulated her. The word came out of my mouth like something foreign. Something borrowed from a version of myself that still believed in being gracious. In taking the high road. In proving that I was mature enough to handle rejection with dignity. I smiled. God help me, I smiled. I told her I wanted her to be happy. That she deserved security. That I understood her choice. I lied with such conviction that I almost believed myself. She cried then. Soft, delicate tears that didn't ruin her makeup, the kind of crying that looks beautiful and tragic rather than desperate and ugly. "You're so understanding," she said, touching my face like she was memorizing it. Like she was already turning me into a memory she could reshape later into something noble and bittersweet. I always knew you would be. That was the worst part. She'd always known I would be understanding. Had counted on it. Had banked on my endless capacity to absorb hurt without complaint. Had weaponized my love into a tool for her own emotional comfort. After she left, I sat in the silence she'd created and felt it press against my chest like a physical weight. Then I stood. Moved to the bedroom, pulled 2 suitcases from the closet. And began the methodical work of erasing her from my life before she could turn me into a ghost she visited on lonely nights when her stable marriage felt too much like a beautiful prison. I packed everything that still had her fingerprints on it. The books she'd recommended. The coffee mug she'd bought. The photographs where we looked happy because we were still pretending the ending could be different. 2 suitcases. That's all that remained of the man who'd loved her. Everything else, I left behind for the person I was about to become. Someone who understood that closure isn't something you're given. It's something you choose. And I was finally ready to choose myself. There was no dramatic goodbye. No closure scene where we said everything we'd been too afraid to speak aloud. No final confrontation where truth exploded like a storm and left us both devastated, but somehow purged. Just absence. Clean. Surgical. Absolute. I deleted my social media on a Wednesday morning that felt like any other. Instagram first, watching our shared memories disappear into digital void with a single confirmation click. Then Facebook. Twitter. LinkedIn. Every platform where she could trace the outline of my existence, gone. I changed my number that afternoon, standing in a phone store with fluorescent lights that made everything feel sterile and new. The employee asked if I wanted to transfer my contacts. No, I said. Fresh start. He smiled like he understood. Like he'd been there too. Maybe he had. I resigned quietly from the job where we'd met, where every conference room held the ghost of a conversation where she'd looked at me like I was her future. 2 weeks' notice. Professional. Cordial. No one asked why. Or maybe they knew better than to. I let myself become untraceable. Not as revenge. Though part of me wondered if she would interpret it that way. Not as punishment, though it might feel like one to her. As self-preservation. Because I had learned, in the brutal classroom of her departure, that some people will consume every piece of you if you let them. Will take your time, your patience, your unwavering faith, and still leave you empty while they move on to someone who requires less assembly. Silence was the first choice I made purely for myself. At first, it felt lonely. The absence of notifications felt like missing limb syndrome, my brain reaching for something that was no longer there. I caught myself almost posting thoughts, almost sharing moments, almost existing in the performative way I'd grown accustomed to. Then it felt clean. Like washing off layers of performance I hadn't realized I was wearing. Like stepping out of clothes that had never fit quite right and standing naked and real and accountable only to myself. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen, all those imaginary arguments where I was articulate and devastating. Where I said everything perfectly and she finally understood what she'd lost. Where I won some phantom battle for dignity. I let them go, stopped imagining explanations she didn't deserve. She'd made her choice with full knowledge of what it would cost. She didn't need my permission to understand it. Didn't need my breakdown to validate it. Didn't need anything from me except my absence. So I gave it to her. The city felt lighter once I no longer expected to run into her. I stopped scanning coffee shops for her silhouette. Stopped holding my breath on subway platforms. Stopped planning escape routes from places we used to love together. New York was mine again. 3 weeks later, the emails started. They came to my work address. The only one she still had access to. The one I'd forgotten to close before I left. Did I do something wrong? The first one was tentative. Confused. Like she genuinely couldn't understand why I'd evaporated. Why won't you answer? The second one carried a note of frustration, as if my silence was an inconvenience rather than a boundary. Please don't disappear like this. The third one trembled with something close to panic. It was almost funny. She could erase me from her future without warning, could replace me with someone more suitable while I was still believing in our afterlife. But my absence terrified her. My unavailability threatened her in ways my presence never had. Because when I was there, waiting, understanding, endlessly patient, I was controllable, predictable, safe, but gone. Gone. I was unknown, unknowable, beyond her influence. And she couldn't stand it. I never replied. Not to the first email. Not to the 20th. Because I had finally learned what she'd been trying to teach me all along, though I doubt she realized it. Some people only value you when they lose access. They measure your worth not by what you give when you're present, but by what they lose when you're gone. And I refused to let her measure me anymore. The silence between us grew thick and permanent. It filled the space where explanations might have lived, where apologies might have nested, where reconciliation might have built a fragile bridge, but I didn't want a bridge. I wanted an ocean, wide, deep, impassable, and every day I didn't respond, the water rose a little higher. She tried everything. Mutual friends became unwitting messengers, showing up in my inbox with carefully worded texts. "Hey, so I heard from..." I replied politely. Said I was fine. Wished everyone well. Gave them nothing they could report back. Old colleagues became reconnaissance agents. Someone was asking about you at the conference. I smiled. Thanked them for letting me know. Changed the subject. Even my sister, my fiercely loyal, protective to a fault sister, got pulled into the campaign. She called me on a Sunday morning, anger vibrating through the phone line. She emailed me, my sister said, her voice sharp enough to cut. A 3-paragraph apology. Like I'm supposed to feel sorry for her. What did you do? Blocked her, after I told her exactly what I thought of someone who treats my brother like a placeholder. I smiled despite myself. You didn't have to do that. Yes, my sister said firmly. I did. The messages from her changed tone as weeks became months. From confusion, I just want to understand what happened. To anger. This silent treatment is childish. We're adults. We can talk. To fear. I just need to hear your voice. Please, don't punish me. And finally, to bargaining. I made a choice, but that doesn't mean you don't matter. That last one almost made me laugh. But I had learned something crucial in the months she'd spent choosing him while keeping me waiting. You can matter and still be discarded. You can be valued in theory while being replaced in practice. You can be someone's what if, while simultaneously being their not enough. I had spent years proving my worth to someone who measured love like an investment portfolio, calculating returns, hedging risks, diversifying emotional assets. I refused to audition again. Refused to perform worthiness for someone who'd already decided I didn't meet their specifications. While she unraveled, and I knew from mutual friends that she was, that her perfect stable marriage was feeling less like security and more like a cage, I rebuilt. New city first. I took a job in Boston. Different skyline. Different rhythms. Different coffee shops that didn't whisper her name in steam and memory. New role. Something challenging. Something that demanded my full attention and rewarded my competence with recognition instead of promises of after. New routines that didn't revolve around someone else's timeline. I started running in the mornings. Cooking elaborate meals just for myself. Reading books she would have called impractical. Taking up hobbies that had no purpose except joy. I bought art for my walls, real art, not prints. Pieces that spoke to something in me that had been quiet for too long. I started sleeping through the night. No more waking at 3 a.m. to check if she'd texted. No more anxiety dreams where I lost her in crowds. No more unconscious reaching for a warmth that was never there. I started laughing without guilt. At first, every moment of happiness felt like betrayal. Like I was supposed to be mourning longer. Suffering more visibly. Proving through my pain that what we had was real. Then I realized. I could honor what we had by building something better. Healing isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself with trumpets and transformation montages. It doesn't happen in dramatic moments of revelation. It's the absence of ache. It's waking up one morning and realizing you forgot to miss her yesterday. It's going a whole week without imagining conversations. It's the slow, quiet realization that you're building a life you actually want instead of waiting for someone else to invite you into theirs. And for the first time since I'd known her, I felt free. Not the desperate freedom of escape. The earned freedom of becoming. I was becoming someone who didn't need her validation to exist fully. Who didn't measure his worth by someone else's willingness to choose him. Someone whole. Someone unbroken. Someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't cruelty. It's indifference. And I was finally, beautifully indifferent to whether she understood what she'd lost. Because I'd found something she couldn't take from me. Myself. Success came quietly too. Not with fanfare or announcement. Not with the dramatic vindication I'd once fantasized about, her seeing my name in lights, realizing her mistake too late. Just steady, accumulating proof that I was more than the man she'd left behind. A promotion landed in my inbox on a Tuesday that felt unremarkable until it wasn't. Senior Director. A title that meant something. That opened doors. That came with respect I hadn't had to beg for. Recognition followed. Industry publications, speaking invitations. People who wanted my perspective, my expertise, my time. Not because I was waiting patiently for them to notice me. Because I'd become worth noticing. I learned to dress for myself, not for some imagined version of who she wanted me to become. Invested in quality pieces that fit the man I was building, not the boy who'd loved her. I spoke with certainty. No more qualifying every statement. No more apologizing for having opinions. No more shrinking my competence to make someone else comfortable. I walked without looking back. Literally and metaphorically. Forward became my only direction. The past was a country I'd emigrated from, and I had no interest in revisiting it, no matter how many times nostalgia sent postcards. I heard through others, because there are always others, always well-meaning friends who think you want to know, that her marriage wasn't what she'd imagined. Stability, it turned out, was cold. Her husband worked late, traveled constantly. Treated her with the same professional courtesy he'd bring to a competent colleague. Predictable. His affection came scheduled. Anniversaries remembered by calendar alerts. Flowers ordered by his assistant. Conversations that never ventured past pleasant. Loveless. Not cruel. Not abusive. Just empty. She'd traded passion for security and found that security without warmth is just a well-decorated prison. She asked about you, a mutual friend said over drinks. Wanted to know if you were seeing anyone. I swirled my whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. And? I told her you seemed happy, that you'd moved on. I had. Not to someone else. I wasn't ready for that yet, maybe wouldn't be for a while. But I'd moved on from the version of myself that believed love required sacrifice of self. She asked to meet. The email came on a Friday evening. Long, carefully crafted. Full of words like closure and understanding and what we meant to each other. I read it once. Then declined. Not out of spite. Though I won't pretend that wasn't a small factor. Not out of hatred. I'd done the hard work of releasing that poison. But because the version of me she knew no longer existed. That man. The one who waited. Who understood. Who made himself small so she had room to grow. Had been dismantled piece by piece and rebuilt into someone new. And the version standing in front of the mirror every morning, the one who'd learned to value his own time, his own worth, his own uncompromised existence, didn't need answers from someone who had already chosen. She'd chosen stability over love, predictability over passion, fear over faith. Those were her choices to make. And I'd spent enough time trying to understand them. Now I was making my own. And my choice was to keep moving forward. To build a life so full, so rich, so thoroughly mine, that her absence became irrelevant. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her regret. I didn't need her to finally understand what she'd lost. I needed to keep becoming the man who would never again settle for being someone's backup plan. The mirror showed me that man now. Confident, whole, free, and for the first time in years, I liked what I saw. We crossed paths once. The universe, it seemed, still believed in poetry. A cafe in the West Village on a Thursday afternoon when rain turned the city soft and gray. The kind of weather that makes everything feel like a memory, like the world is reminiscing about itself. I ducked inside to escape the downpour, shaking water from my coat, when I saw her. Smaller, somehow. That was the first thing I noticed. As if her choices had compressed her, folded her into a more manageable version of herself. Tired. The second thing, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, the kind that come from worry, not laughter. She sat alone at a corner table, staring into a cup of coffee like it held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. Our eyes met. Recognition flared in hers, sharp, immediate, desperate. I saw her stand, hesitate, calculate the distance between us and whether crossing it was allowed. I should have left, should have pretended not to see her, should have walked back into the rain and preserved the clean ending I'd worked so hard to create. But something in me needed to know. Not who she'd become, but who I was now, facing her. "Hi," she said, approaching slowly like I was something wild she might startle. "Hi." My voice was calm. Neutral. The voice I'd use with anyone from my past who no longer had claim to my present. "I didn't think you'd really disappear," she whispered. The cafe noise hummed around us. Espresso machines hissing, conversations murmuring, rain drumming against windows like an audience waiting for our scene to unfold. I smiled, politely, kindly, like a stranger would when encountering another stranger's vulnerable confession. "I didn't think you'd notice," I replied. That was the truth. Not delivered with venom. Not meant to wound. Just honest observation. When she'd chosen him, chosen security, chosen the mapped-out future over the uncertain one we might have built together, I genuinely believed I was forgettable. Believed my absence would be a brief discomfort before relief settled in. "I noticed," she said, and something in her voice cracked. "God, I noticed everything. Your silence was so loud it drowned out everything else. I'm sorry you experienced it that way." The apology was reflex, habit. Then I caught myself. "Actually, no, I'm not sorry." Her eyes widened slightly. "You made choices that were right for you," I continued, my voice steady, neither cruel nor kind, just factual. "I made choices that were right for me. That's how it works. But we could have talked." "About what?" I asked gently. "You chose security. I chose self-respect. There's nothing to negotiate there." The rain intensified outside, turning the windows into watercolor paintings of the city. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "No," I said, and I meant it. "You made a choice. Choices aren't mistakes just because they don't turn out how you imagined." She looked at me like I was speaking a language she once knew but had forgotten. "You've changed," she said. "Yes." I didn't elaborate. Didn't explain the work it took to rebuild myself. Didn't offer her a roadmap to understanding my transformation. Some things aren't for sharing. "Are you happy?" she asked, and I heard what she really meant. "Tell me you're miserable without me. Tell me I matter. Tell me my choice broke you beyond repair." "I'm building something good," I said instead. "Something mine." Outside, the rain began to slow. Sun breaking through clouds like hope breaking through resignation. I should go, I said. Wait. But I was already moving toward the door. Take care of yourself, I called back, not unkindly. Not hopefully. Just. Finally. The rain had become mist by the time I stepped outside. I walked without looking back. And this time, when I didn't turn around, it wasn't discipline. It was freedom. Silence taught me restraint. Taught me that the most powerful response is sometimes no response at all. That absence can be more eloquent than any carefully crafted speech. It taught me that closure is not something someone gives you. Not a gift they bestow when they're ready. Not a conversation that happens on their timeline. Not an explanation that finally makes the pain make sense. It's something you choose. Actively. Deliberately. Daily, until it becomes automatic. I chose closure every morning I woke up and didn't check if she'd tried to contact me. Every time a mutual friend mentioned her name and I changed the subject without malice. Every moment I invested in my own future instead of rehearsing conversations with my past. I didn't need her apology. An apology would have required me to absolve her, and I had no interest in holding that kind of power over her conscience. She could work that out herself. I didn't need her regret. Regret changes nothing. Doesn't unwrite history. Doesn't return time. Doesn't transform her choice into something it wasn't. I needed my life back. And I had it. Reclaimed it piece by piece. Morning by morning. Choice by choice. I had my time back, no longer spent waiting for someone to decide I was worth prioritizing. I had my energy back, no longer exhausted from making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I had my faith back, not in love, perhaps, but in myself. In my ability to survive loss and build something beautiful from the wreckage. Silence became my architecture. The framework I built my new life upon. It wasn't empty or cold. It was full. Full of possibility, of autonomy, of the radical freedom that comes from owing nothing to anyone's narrative but your own. Sometimes, late at night when the city quieted and I sat with my thoughts, I wondered if she understood. If she'd learned, as I had, that some people teach you about love by showing you everything it shouldn't be. Then I'd remember. It didn't matter. Her understanding or lack thereof had no bearing on my peace. And that realization, that her internal world was no longer my concern, felt like the final piece clicking into place. I was free. Not because I'd forgiven her. Not because I'd forgotten her. But because I'd finally, completely, chosen myself. And in that choice, I found something she could never take from me. The unshakable knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was, without apology, without explanation, without needing anyone's validation to exist fully in my own life. The silence wasn't punishment, it was protection, it was peace. It was the sound of a man finally learning to value himself, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. She married for stability and lost something she couldn't calculate. The intangible things that don't appear on spreadsheets or prenuptial agreements. The warmth that comes from being chosen, not because you make sense, but because someone can't imagine their world without you in it. She'd optimized for security and found it exactly as advertised. Solid. Dependable. Emotionally temperature-controlled. And completely, utterly hollow. I heard she tried to fix it. Therapy. Retreats. Long conversations about rekindling passion in practical partnerships. But you can't manufacture chemistry in a relationship built on calculation. Meanwhile, I took my silence. Kept it close like a talisman. Let it remind me that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's willingness to see it. I took my dignity, the hardest thing to preserve when someone you love treats you like an option. But I'd held on to it, even when it would have been easier to beg, to demand, to make myself small enough to fit into her new life's margins. I took my future. Uncompromised. Unlimited. Unwritten. Every day was mine to build however I wanted. No more waiting for someone else's timeline to align with mine. No more putting dreams on hold until someone felt secure enough to let me pursue them. And unlike her, I never looked back. Not with longing. Not with bitterness. Not with the desperate hope that she'd realize her mistake. Because I'd learned the most important lesson. Love should never require you to disappear to be valued. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink. Doesn't make you prove your worth through patience that borders on self-erasure. Doesn't measure your devotion by how much you're willing to sacrifice. Real love sees you. Chooses you. Keeps choosing you. And I was finally seen. By myself. I looked in the mirror every morning and saw someone worth choosing. Someone who'd survived being unchosen and emerged stronger, clearer, more certain of his own value. The man looking back at me now was unrecognizable from the one who'd loved her. That man had been gentle to the point of self-destruction. Patient to the point of invisibility. Understanding to the point of accepting unacceptable treatment. This man knew his worth. Demanded reciprocity. Walked away from anything that asked him to be less than he was. This man had standards. And she no longer met them. Sometimes I wondered if she thought about me. If in the quiet moments of her stable, predictable, loveless marriage, she remembered what we had. What she gave up. Then I'd remind myself. It didn't matter. Her regrets were hers to carry. Mine was a lighter load. I'd grieved. Rebuilt. Moved on. And in moving on, I'd found something infinitely more valuable than her belated recognition. Self-possession. The knowledge that I didn't need anyone's love to validate my existence. That I could build a life so full. So rich. So thoroughly mine that no one person's absence could diminish it. She'd taught me that lesson unwillingly, and I'd learned it thoroughly. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to find security, she'd lost the one person who would have given her unconditional safety. In choosing stability over love, she'd condemned herself to a lifetime of wondering what she'd traded away. While I, the impractical choice, the risky investment, the man who didn't make sense on paper, had found exactly what she'd been searching for. Not in another person, but in myself. And that made all the difference. The future stretched before me. Vast and uncertain and beautiful. I walked into it alone. But I was not lonely. I was free.